Hey guys, red and black greetings. This is Flamengo. Welcome to the Paparazzo Rubro-Negro channel. If you're just arriving, please follow, like, and share on all platforms. On YouTube, subscribe below. Turn on the bell notification and leave that awesome like on the video. We're here, man, bringing important information, a special video. I got in touch with my friend Fabrício Kika, and he made a point of recording a video for his channel and for our channel. On this topic that I suggested, I thought it was necessary to bring more information about the trap issue for these SAFs. A lot of people want to follow along. A lot of people like Kika. Kika is very smart, knows a lot about these Sociedade Anônima do Futebol topics, stadiums and everything else, and will always be participating here. He was the one who participated in the Barba Cash podcast. I thought it was very relevant for us to bring Fabrício Kika's participation here, and we're going to follow it here. I'm going to react along with you, but it's important for us to bring some information right away. Cruzeiro's official response to Flamengo's offer, the latest offer for Caio Jorge. I told you yesterday, some people criticized me, saying that Pedrinho, the owner of Cruzeiro's Sociedade Anônima do Futebol, Pedro Lourenço, he said, there's no offer, there's no offer. Some people said, see, the guy denied the offer, called you liars, he denied the offer. I said, that's not how people from Minas talk. There's no such thing as an offer, and we're not selling. And his son, Pedro Jr., who is the vice president of Cruzeiro's Sociedade Anônima do Futebol, confirmed what I was saying. And then I tell you guys, we speak with information. We had the exclusive information that Flamengo's offer to Cruzeiro was sent by email. It was the first official real offer, the actual offer by email. And he replied, yesterday Flamengo made another move. The amounts weren't higher than what he had already offered, basically because he offered 32 million, including the value of Cebolinha. So he understands that Flamengo didn't raise the offer much. They made the proposal official with Cruzeiro, as we can see, basically made the proposal official with Cruzeiro. Once again, we thank them. We understand that the project presented to Caio Jorge at the meeting is very big. He is a very important asset for the club, one of the key pieces for our squad. Reports say Cruzeiro set the price at 50 million euros, and Pedrinho has already discussed selling. And then he said the following, Pedro Jr. We understand that with the amounts offered by Flamengo, which were less than 40 million euros in total. Look, that's close to what we said, huh? We said this yesterday, 40 million euros counting everything Flamengo offered. His staying is more important, okay? Another important point confirmed by the president was the contract renewal with Caio Jorge. Pedro Jr. revealed that the striker's agents are in Belo Horizonte to finalize the contract extension, right? So they took the bait. They fell into the trap. Look, open quotes for Pedro Jr. We are going to extend his contract and give him a salary increase, which is fair for what Kaio has contributed to value him as well in this year of 2026. We should finalize the contract renewal in the next few days. In other words, there was interest from Flamengo, the legal kind of approach, just like every club does, just like they did with Gerson Zenik, just like Flamengo signed their Arrascaeta when they signed Mateus Cunha, who unfortunately got injured. And a number of situations like that are normal. The interest, the approach is normal. It's different from tampering. Well, yeah, he says here that he's a player who understood Cruzeiro's project, understood his importance here, and that made us very comfortable to thank Flamengo for their offer. It's an important offer, a significant amount, but at this moment, Cruzeiro understands that it will not give up one of its main players. It's because of the signings we're making. We're sending a message that we want to fight for titles. It's an important year for the club. Cruzeiro is going to fight for titles, and Caio Jorge is a key part of this project. We don't want to give up one of our main strikers. We really believe in him. So just to be clear, right, was that it? Yeah, it's an interview. That's what it is. Exclusive for 98 Live Sports. So Pedro Jr. is Pedrinho's son, making it clear that there was indeed an offer, but they considered it too low and didn't want to negotiate. What did Flamengo do about that? Flamengo made an offer for a player they really wanted, but Flamengo is stirring up the market. We see Fluminense trying to strengthen their squad without really having the means, thinking about becoming a Sociedade Anônima do Futebol, but they're still reinforcing and spending millions. Botafogo with the transfer ban and fighting with Flamengo over signings, which we're going to talk about right now. I'll even leave it to talk about after we hear from Fabrício Kika. But all the clubs, Palmeiras trying to sign Thiago Almada, right? Within Flamengo, do they understand? I even asked about Thiago Almada, and they think Almada doesn't want to return to Brazilian football. But I said, look, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? Because he's a top player, and that's even a reason for us to call Fabrício Kika. I think it's important for us to talk about this striker that Flamengo has decided on, who has to be up to 26 years old. And we're seeing that the difficulty in finding a striker and who can already sign a pre-contract. Then there's Lewandowski, right? He even posed for a photo wearing the Flamengo jersey and everything. But he's 37 years old, but he can play for another year or two. You make a contract so you have time to find a striker in the market. And this guy becomes an idol here. And the most important thing, right? Why is it worth signing a Lewandowski? And it's not crazy. I'll explain it to you. Flamengo will broadcast 29 of their home games, the games they host in the Brazilian League, and all of Flamengo's games in the Carioca. There are 29 games that Flamengo will broadcast abroad, and people overseas want to see stars. They want to see famous players, and Flamengo would have that. Jorginho, Galatico, Saul, important players, Danilo, Alexandro, right? And Rascaita himself is already very well known today, but there would be a player with extreme star power, which is Lewandowski, with his history at Bayern and everything else. That move would be interesting. Why are we talking about this? Because Flamengo is capable. They'll spend less than signing someone like Caio Jorge. They'll pay the signing bonus, sign a contract, and their games will be more appealing abroad. Sponsorships will come for marketing. It's unbelievable. Sponsorships will come, and Flamengo will have an incredible audience for their games, broadcast abroad on YouTube. Everyone will want to see Lewandowski playing for Flamengo, and Flamengo could have an incredible marketing return. So that's my explanation for why I think that even at his advanced age, he could be an interesting marketing strategy and a player to fill the gap until Flamengo finds the younger player they want. And this player that Flamengo wants to spend more on and bring in, who's hard to find and scarce in the market. Since Cruzeiro took the bait, what do you guys think about this idea I mentioned and Cruzeiro taking the bait? Do you think Cruzeiro is falling into Flamengo's trap? Let's see what Fabrício Kika has to say about this. I invite you to subscribe to Mundo na Bola, which is Fabrício Kika's channel. It's amazing.
From his channel, subscribe to the channel too.
Hold on, let's go.
Thank you, Gabriel, for the opportunity once again to be here on your channel. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you for the opportunity to let me explain now with a little more time this issue that I mentioned with our friend Rafael Cota on Barbacast about this strategic move by Flamengo. That was a short clip about what is actually a more complex strategy. In that clip, I talk about Flamengo intentionally inflating the market as part of a strategy. And today, we'll be able to explain this strategy in more detail.
So it's really.
Before we get into this discussion about the strategy, let's show a little bit here. We need to understand a little bit about the issue of financial fair play, which has been in effect since January 1st. Well, the Brazilian Football Confederation's financial fair play will have very serious penalties starting in 2028, so let's go now. This year, there are also penalties for new debts. If the clubs start delaying payments on debts made from January 1st onwards, there will be no more tolerance. But for the old debts, the clubs still have a period until the end of November to adapt.
I'll put it on the full screen here so you can follow along, and I'll say what I think at the end. Okay?
Well, what's happening? The Brazilian Football Confederation's financial fair play is based on 4 pillars. The first pillar, Pillar 1, refers to overdue debts with zero tolerance. Pillar 2, deficit results, zero tolerance. A club cannot have an accumulated loss greater than 20 million reais over 3 years. Pillar 3, squad costs control. In 2028, a club will be able to spend up to 80% of its revenue, plus investment, plus net player sales, as football department expenses. In other words, if you have a revenue of 100 million, you can spend 80 million on payroll and player signings in your football department. That's in 2028. And pillar 4 is a very important pillar, which is the limit of 60% of relevant revenues for the payment of short-term debts, which are those debts that are due in the current year. A club cannot have short-term debts greater than 60% of its revenues. This is in 2028. These numbers, they change. They get a little worse starting in 2030. In 2030, Pillar 3, what was 80 drops to 70, and Pillar 4. Only 45 of the relevant revenues can be used for short-term debt payments. There's an important detail there. When we talk about relevant revenues, okay? We're talking about relevant revenues, which are operational revenues, ticket sales, club membership, sponsorship, television, and so on. Financial revenues, interest, earnings, athlete transfers, player sales. But investor contributions don't count, patron contributions don't count. It's only what the club is able to raise. What does that mean? Well, that means that the clubs that have historically been in debt, that have very short-term debts, that have difficulties, today they have to start planning so that in 2028 they are not in this situation, because otherwise they will be violating this regulation. If a club, for example, doesn't have this problem today, but hires a lot of players by paying in installments, paying annually, for example, they might have short-term debt problems, and in 2 or 3 years, when several installments of player debts come due. We're going to talk a little more about this, continuing here, talking a bit more about financial fair play. Why aren't the contributions counted, and why is it important to talk about this? Because the less informed fan about SAFs in particular says things like this. My company, the company that bought my team, has a lot of money. The guys are going to keep putting money into everything. But for the payment of short-term debts, the contributions don't count for the following reason. There's a technical reason. Why? Because the Brazilian Football Confederation wants to preserve the clubs, the longevity of these clubs, the sustainability of these clubs. If the short-term debts depend on an investor's contribution, then there's a serious problem. That's not a long-term project. The technical view of this is the following. To prevent clubs from going into debt by relying on uncertain future contributions, and to force them to be sustainable through their own revenues. Well, Pillar 4, okay, which talks about these significant revenues and talks about short-term debts. There's a very important point, which is the following. When we talk about Pillar 4 and talk about buying players, there's a relatively simple strategy. What can the investor do? The investor can buy players in cash. Okay, I make an investment here of 100 million, buy a player in cash, and well, that solves the problem of Pillar 4. That doesn't increase short-term debt, but there's a catch, which is Pillar 3. I'll explain this more calmly to you. Even with cash, the 70 is still a problem. Imagine a team, any team, whose revenue is 200 million reais per year. This club has high expenses, with a strong squad costing 500 million reais annually, and relies on a 300 million reais yearly investment from its patron. Well, in this case, these 300 million reais are accounted for as debt, and then it counts as debt, and then it starts to fall into other categories. In Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, it starts to be counted as a problem. But the point is this. A club's fan might say no, but the investor who owns my club, Sociedade Anônima do Futebol, is a die-hard fan. He's donating the money. Well, the Brazilian Football Confederation's financial fair play was created so that the owner fan can't buy the championship. He might even try, but he'll have to burn billions of his own assets as donations without being able to register that as debt, and still running the risk of being punished under Pillar 2 operational deficit. In other words, the club has to be sustainable without the injections. I'll talk about this in more detail. Well, if the Brazilian Football Confederation, when it receives the balance sheets, notices that this club only survives and is only sustainable and only operates in the black, because it depends on these huge injections, the Brazilian Football Confederation will require a sustainability plan, right? What is the plan being implemented in this club to reduce its dependence on these injections? Obviously, or it wouldn't make sense. And then this club will be classified under Pillar 2 because the club is running a deficit without its investors' injections. I recently used the example of pharmacies and some people didn't quite understand, and I'm going to explain it here a bit more calmly and in a bit more detail. Imagine a small town with 3 different pharmacies all selling the same medicine. Prices are about 10 reais. Some sell for 10, others for 10.50 or 9.90. Then Flamengo's strategy to manipulate the market price begins. Good. A large pharmacy chain enters and sells the same medicine for 2.50. That's below cost price. Why? Because the chain can handle this hit for a period of time. Not always, but for a period of time. What's the first move? The pharmacies aren't closing, they're just lowering their prices. So where it used to be 10, it becomes 7, 6, 5.50, 4.50. And what happens after a while is that these pharmacies close. Flamengo isn't seeking a monopoly. That's not the case. The focus is on this movement. A predatory pricing, reversed in this case, increasing to eliminate the competition. And I'll explain this in more detail. Using a clearer example, in this pharmacy scenario, what would the big pharmacy do once its competitors go out of business? Raise prices and recover their losses? That's not the obvious point. The point is the process where the pharmacies start lowering their prices. That's what I'm saying. It's the opposite in the case of soccer. That's what happens in the case of soccer. The clubs start increasing their expenses in a very significant way. They start raising their values. They start raising their values. They start raising their values, getting more and more in over their heads. How does this process of clubs getting in over their heads work? Well, let's use an example here, not the pharmacy one. Let's use an example of any fictional club, right? Let's call this club here the Club of the Falling Star. This Club of the Falling Star. It receives sponsorship, for example, from the fictional PL supermarkets. This club is sponsored by PL Supermarkets, which, coincidentally, is the company owned by the person who bought this fictional club, which doesn't exist. Obviously, okay, and he's displaying the PL brand there at a value much higher than the real value. Well, that's not allowed either, obviously. Why? Because in Article A4 of the Brazilian Football Confederation's Financial Fair Play, it talks about fair market value. That's the main filter of the Brazilian Football Confederation. The regulation states that all transactions generating revenue for the club must be recorded at fair value. How does it work if the market value for that space on the jersey is 30 million? The Brazilian Football Confederation considers the extra 70 million for the purposes of calculating financial fair play. That's right, the club might even receive the money, it will receive the money, but for the financial fair play rule, it will only have raised 30 million. This will affect Pillar 3 spending control. This will impact Pillar 2 in the deficit operation. The filter for related parties. Brazilian Football Confederation defines as related parties any entity that has a direct or indirect connection with the club's control. That's what I said. So, for example, your club can't display the advertisement of the investor's wife's company, I don't know, the jewelry company of the investor's wife on the shirt. You can't, because that falls under the related parties filter. There are also several filters to prevent this obvious loophole. Oh, so you just put any sponsorship of 50 billion? No, you can't. There's a tool that prohibits that. How does this apply in practice? In practice, we'll use some more realistic numbers so we can try to understand. How will hiring more expensive players, like increasing the salaries of your players, impact the clubs that depend on financial contributions? Well, the scenario is this. Suppose a Sociedade Anônima do Futebol is actual revenue is 400 million, matching the relevant revenue we discussed. Without the contributions, the billionaire owner invests 600 million per year in that club. The basis for the calculation of Pillar 3, the one that talks about the 70 spending limit, is 700 million per year. That club that has 1 billion reais, counting significant revenues plus the investor's contribution, has 700 million to invest per year in their good soccer to become competitive. The guy says, well, let's crush it here. I can even put in a little more money this year. Let's sign players like crazy. So what he says, he decides, for example, obviously to sign stars. The owner signs 4 world-class players, paying 400 million up front, 100 million reais per player. They have 3-year contracts paid up front. He gets rid of Pillar 4 of short-term debt, the amortization calculation. Here's the big catch in this story. 400 million divided by 3 equals 133 million per year. This goes into Pillar 370, even if the owner paid everything on the first day. For financial fair play, the club spends 133 million every year during the contract. This falls under the squad cost that goes into Pillar 3, the one that limits spending to 70. Well, how much does this crazy investment from this year by the investor or fan, the owner of the Sociedade Anônima do Futebol, impact Pillar 3 of the 70? Well, I'll do the math here. Amortization, the purchase cost is 400 million divided by 3, that's 133 million per year. The salary plus image rights plus charges, the payroll cost. Each player will earn 2 million reais per month, which is typical in Brazilian soccer today for 13 months. That's 26 million per year per player. 26 million times 4 is 104 million reais per year. 104 plus 133 million. 237 million per year. These 4 players represent 34% of the total expenses that club can have with its soccer team. That's the first big trap. If Flamengo actually manages to manipulate the market, causing inflation in the market, it will require the investor to always put in that money. Why? What's the next step, right? The trap is if the owner stops putting in the 600 million in funding, the ceiling drops to 280 million. Basically, the guy says, no, I don't want to play anymore. I don't have 600 million. I'm done. So those 4 players, then they move on. Instead of 34, they simply start consuming 85. They consume 85 of the available amount from those 70, almost all of it, right? And there are 2 more important items, the trigger for the negative trend. This is the most dangerous for the Sociedade Anônima do Futebol, which depends on contributions from the Brazilian Football Confederation. Contributions from investors. The Brazilian Football Confederation monitors the historical evolution. How does the National Authority for Financial Responsibility and Sustainability work? Realize that the club is following the rules today only because the owner is putting in money, but its own revenue is stagnant or declining. It can require a sustainability plan, aiming to force the club to prove that if the investor leaves, it won't collapse. If the plan isn't convincing, the Brazilian Football Confederation can limit new player registrations even before the club breaks the rule. What does this tell us? It tells us that it's no use. It's no use having a big investor paying Clubs have to become sustainable investor. You can put the teams on track, you can build a competitive team, but you have to create mechanisms so that he stops putting in money every year. Finally, there's the trigger of the negative trend. Still on the sustainability plan that the Brazilian Football Confederation will require from these clubs that depend on funding, it's not enough for the owner to say he'll keep putting in money. The Brazilian Football Confederation requires organic revenue plans, such as boosting sponsorships, ticket sales, and memberships. What is the timeline for reducing dependency? And when will the club stop needing funding for salaries? What are the actual guarantees? The investor must provide bank guarantees that the promised funds will be deposited. What Flamengo is doing? When does Flamengo start increasing their players' salaries? It causes targeted signings at other clubs, forcing those players from other clubs to be valued through salary increases. When a new signing cap is set, in other words, the best players from last season start costing more than, for example, 30 million euros. New standards are being set in the market. Another important point, Flamengo is not doing this alone. Palmeiras did this last year. Healthy clubs already do this, and now Flamengo will do it even more. What is the logical reason for BAP to say that he has $1 billion to spend in the football department? Second, Flamengo will always be the club that spends the most in the transfer windows. What is the reason for doing this? What was the reason for optimizing all expenses? Those expenses that are shown in Olympic sports, for example. All of this makes a lot of sense. Is that all? Flamengo is pressuring the market, affecting today's teams. The SAFs that depend on investments have to invest even more so that in 2028, these SAFs either break the pillars of financial fair play or always require more investments, always demanding more investments. They make Flamengo. It makes these SAFs less attractive for resale, making the business not as valuable. The strategy is smart, but whether it works remains to be seen. It won't happen this transfer window or the next. It's a medium to long-term process. I hope I answered your question. My response was longer than expected, but thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
Man, I really want to thank Fabrício Kika for answering our request. He also uploaded it to his channel. You can also go there and check out all the videos he has, which are amazing. Fabrício Kika does a fantastic job in the world, in football. And so we have this extra information to share with you, Fabrício Kika. For me, it's perfect, man. His analysis is perfect, fantastic, right? I think he's an extremely intelligent guy and has a very, very important point of view. Look at this Fogão net. It says here that Flamengo's offer to Andrew includes a longer contract and a higher salary than what Botafogo offered. So Flamengo outbid Botafogo. Yeah. Andrew's application, Botafogo's offer, the club that developed him. Yeah. Yeah, they even gave a positive signal, but there's the transfer issue. Yeah. He misses out on Flamengo and loses his Botafogo chance too. Yeah, and according to OGLOBO, Andrew also says behind the scenes that he prefers Botafogo, but he's also been hearing from people close to him who support the project presented by Flamengo. He's in the final months of his contract with Chico Vicente and can sign a pre-contract for a free transfer starting July 1st. Okay, so is Flamengo's offer for Andrew better than Botafogo's? Even Botafogo profiles are saying that Andrew's offer is better. Flamengo's offer for Andrew is better than Botafogo's, okay? So Flamengo is facing difficulties. Botafogo is the team that discovered him. But there's also the issue with Botafogo that the difficulty they're facing is the troubled moment with a transfer ban. It's a financial issue, right? No one really trusts Botafogo's financial situation right now. So, man, I'll leave you here to follow Flamengo's channel, Fabrício Kika, The World of Soccer, right? And we'll be back throughout the day. There's also the Paparazzo Rubro-Negro 2 channel and Paparazzo's Moment. We'll keep sharing highlights and info with the videos. Thank you very much once again. I really want to thank you for tuning in. Remember to subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notification, and leave a cool like on the video. Red and black greetings. This is Flamengo. Big hug. Thanks. I'm out.